So thank you for joining us for week 5 of the Grace Community Church Explore course. I thought it might make sense to give a quick recap of where we've got to so far, given that we started a few weeks ago and this is a little bit late. In week 1, we just started by talking about what do people think Christianity is all about, and also we started asking that question, what do people think life is all about, and what's gone wrong with life, and those sorts of questions. And we started to establish where do you go for information that you want, and we looked at those principles that we want to go somewhere that is both trustworthy, that we can trust the motives of the people telling us, but we also want to go somewhere or to someone who has the authority that they know what they're talking about. So in the second week, therefore, we started looking at the Bible. We looked at why we think the Bible might be a good place to go for information about Jesus in particular. And we looked at explicitly what does Christianity claim about Jesus and about his identity. And we looked at the fact that Jesus in the Bible is portrayed not just as a good guy or a teacher, but he's portrayed as God himself, come to forgive sin. So in week 3 we started unpacking what sin meant in the Bible, that word sin means in Christianity, and how it's this idea that it's something actually that we're all guilty of. Something that is true for all of us, that we can all look in our own lives and realise we're certainly not as good as we'd like to be, and we're certainly not as good as God expects us to be. And we're all guilty of the same crime, effectively, of saying to God, look, I don't want you in my life. I know that you made this world and you own it, but I don't want you to have anything to do with how I run my life. In effect, our motto is the same as the Frank Sinatra song, I did it my way. And that's the problem. And then we also in week 3 started to look at the solution. We looked at Jesus on the cross and what is going on there. We looked at Jesus dying in the outer darkness, crying to his Father, my God, why have you forsaken me? And as he does so, the curtain in the temple is torn in two. And we see that Jesus is dying, taking on himself the punishment that people like you and I deserve from God for all the sin in our lives, all the things we've done wrong, all the way we've hurt other people. God himself punishes Jesus in our place as a substitute. And because Jesus has taken that punishment, the way is open for us to be reconciled back to God. And that's what week 4 was all about, which we looked at a couple of weeks ago. We looked at this bridge diagram. And we said, look, what we're talking about is a relationship breakdown. That there's a relationship breakdown between us and God. And as a consequence, because God is the God of life and we said no to him, the consequence of us saying no to God is ultimately will be death. And we saw there's no way we can cross this divide ourselves. We can't match God's standard. But yet what we've seen is that Jesus has acted in love on the cross to provide this bridge. And we looked at those words, and it means that we're now justified, saved, reconciled, that we're counted righteous now instead. With the implications that we're forgiven, we're part of God's family, and we have a freedom, a new freedom, not to do whatever we want to do, but a freedom to live life God's way in God's world. That's the big story of Christianity as we've unpacked it so far. And so as we get to week 5, what we'd like you to think about is how Christianity presents this message. And a good analogy would be that Christianity is saying, look, the world's in trouble. It's like you're on an ocean liner that's sinking. And that's the bad news. But the good news is there are lifeboats for you to get into. And Jesus is that lifeboat for you. And to give you an idea of what that might look like and how we might react, there's a great clip. Now we can't use it because YouTube flags it as a copyright issue. But if you'd like to go and look at it, do look at look up online the moment when Titanic is the news is getting out that Titanic is about to sink. Have a look and think about what sort of reactions you see amongst the passengers and crew, and then we'll get into this week. Well, I don't know if you were able to find the clip of Titanic or if you've seen it before, but in it you'll see lots of different reactions to what is going on. And what happens is we see first the designer, he's the one who's breaking the news. And he says, look, the ship will sink. That's what he tells everyone. He knows. And at first the owner, his reply, he's incredulous. He says, but this ship can't sink. He's in denial. The captain, however, he knows different. And you can see, if you watch that clip, a look of utter horror and shock on his face. But he accepts it. And he accepts the news. And the crew, some of them just carry on as normal. What you see is the musicians carry on playing. The waiters keep on serving drinks. And then you get a real mixed reaction from the passengers. There's a lot of ignorance. There is some puzzlement. But with Rose, the main character, played by Kate Winslet, as she speaks to the designer, she asks him what's going on, and he tells her, and she's immediately persuaded. And that's a picture, as I've said, of kind of what Christianity is saying. Look, the world's in trouble. It's like what we read in the Gospels is like the designer telling everyone, look, the ship's going down. God is telling us, look, there's a problem here, but there's also a solution. On Titanic, there weren't enough lifeboats, but with Jesus, here is a lifeboat sufficient to sort this problem out for everyone. And in some ways, the question comes back, well, why should we trust what we read in these gospel accounts? Why should we trust that? Why do the people here react differently to the news? Why does the captain accept it? Why does the owner deny it? And I think when you look at particularly those two examples, you think, look, the owner denies it because he's working on a faulty assumption. He says, doesn't he, this ship can't sink, this is the unsinkable ship. The designer replies, it's made of iron, I assure you it can. But that's why he denies it. The captain, on the other hand, accepts. And I think everyone who accepts the news realises those two things that we've talked about throughout these last few weeks. They realise that the designer here, he knows what he's talking about. He designed Titanic. He's got what philosophers call epistemic authority. But they also know that he's not trying to deceive them. He's not a bad guy. He's not trying to pull the wool over their eyes. And that's why they accept the news. And I guess you see there, therefore, these different reactions. And as we get to this point in the Explore course, and we've talked about the news that Christianity is bringing, you could have a number of different reactions too. So some of us might listen to that news and think, oh yes, I do believe it, and I trust it, I want it. You're persuaded straight off, show me to the lifeboat. Others of you might be thinking, well, I do find this message compelling. There's lots about this message that makes sense to me, but I'm not persuaded that it's true. How do I really know that Jesus is who he says he is and he can do what he said he can do? Or you might be maybe a third reaction, which is, look, I don't find anything so far compelling, and I don't really like it. It's not attractive to me, and I don't want any part of it. The question I guess we're going to think about in these next few minutes is that a wise response to the news that we've been talking about? Or are there perhaps maybe some faulty assumptions that we're working on if we come out to a place where we deny the truth of everything we've been hearing about? Let me read to you a story, an account of what happened after Jesus' death and burial, and we'll see why. This is the piece of evidence, if you like, that the gospel writers are presenting, which should make us all have maybe at least good reason to consider accepting that what Jesus has done is trustworthy, is true. Let me read it's from Luke chapter 14, and it's the account of what happened after Jesus was killed and he was buried. This is from Luke 24. On the first day of the week, very early in the morning, the women took the spices they had prepared and they went to the tomb. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they entered they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. While they were wondering about this, suddenly 2 men in clothes that gleamed like lightning stood beside them. In their fright the women bowed down with their faces to the ground, but the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, he is risen. Remember how he told you while he was still with you in Galilee, the Son of Man must be delivered over to the hands of sinners, be crucified, and on the 3rd day be raised again." And then they remembered his words. When they came back from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11 and to all the others. It was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the others with them who told this to the apostles. But they did not believe the women, because their words seemed to them like nonsense. Peter, however, got up and ran to the tomb. Bending over, he saw the strips of linen lying by themselves, and he went away wondering to himself what had happened. Then we pick up the story a few verses later. While they were still talking about this, Jesus stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you." They were startled and frightened, thinking they saw a ghost. He said to them, "Why are you troubled, and why do doubts rise in your minds? Look at my hands and my feet. It is myself. Touch me and see. A ghost does not have flesh and bones, as you see I have." When he said this, he showed them his hands and his feet, and while they still did not believe it because of joy and amazement, he asked them, "Do you have anything to eat?" They gave him a piece of broad fish, and he took it and ate it in their presence. He said to them, "This is what I told you while I was still with you. Everything must be fulfilled that is written about me in the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms." Then he opened their minds so they could understand the scriptures, and he told them, "This is what is written. The Messiah will suffer and rise from the dead on the 3rd day, and repentance for the forgiveness of sins will be preached in his name to all nations, beginning at Jerusalem. And you are witnesses of these things. I'm going to send you what my Father has promised." So that's the account of what happened next. And that might be the first time you've heard that particular part of the Christian story. And you might well be reacting like the disciples did. You might be thinking, that does sound like nonsense. That sounds crazy. But let's just pause for a minute and think, what are the implications if that story is true? If Jesus really did rise from the dead, as it was foretold he would do, then it means here is one who has defeated death. Here is one who can provide an answer to that cycle we talked about, where we just go round and round but get nowhere. Here is someone who can provide an answer to our biggest, deepest problem, the problem of death itself. Here is one who can reconcile us to the God who made us. Now it might be, as I said, you think that this is all nonsense, this is totally unpersuasive. How could anyone believe such a fairy story? And many others would have reacted exactly the same as you will have done. But it is worth pausing and thinking then that, fine, maybe you're not persuaded by Christianity, but I would gently ask you, well, what are your assumptions then? What are your answers to some of those big questions in life? Where have we come from? Where are we going? What's our significance or purpose whilst we're here? What's wrong with the world? How does it get fixed? Because we all have answers to those questions. I think, and obviously I'm persuaded, that Christianity provides a compelling, persuasive case for the answers to those things. And once you take God out of the picture, then any answers that we provide to those questions are quite difficult. I'm not sure they satisfy. Just take, for example, the issue of significance, of meaning. If we take God out of the picture, an ultimate designer, creator, and all we are is advanced biological machines, collections of atoms and chemical reactions, then certainly we're no more valuable than any animal life. There's no such thing, is there, of sanctity of life. We're just all here as an accident of a process, a scientific process. Or think equally about the issue of ethics, right and wrong. Again, if you take an ultimate author out of the picture who knows why we were made and is able to tell us what is right and wrong, then all we're left to do is to try and work out what is right and wrong ourselves. And in history, humanity hasn't had a good track record of that. Without someone to referee, then it's my feelings versus your feelings, or my reason versus your experience. There's no way of agreeing a common code that we all agree on. So I think there are some really big problems if you take God out of the picture. The other thing to consider is it's possible that you just might not like the sound of this, that there is a God out there to whom we owe everything. And you'd rather, just as the Frank Sinatra song, just get on and do it your way. But there is something to consider, isn't there? That there are some things in life that initially we might not like the sound of, but it makes sense to accept them anyway. Think of things like scientific laws, like gravity. If you walked to the top of a very tall building and you stood on the precipice, you say, look, I've heard a lot about this gravity that people are talking about. But personally, I'm not persuaded. I don't like the idea that if I step off this building, I'll fall. I like to think that I'm able to fly. And so you step off. But what happens then is your own preference is trumped by scientific reality. And I guess what we're saying here is Christianity presents a picture that isn't a question of likes or dislikes, of preference. It presents a picture of the God who is there. And therefore, whether or not you so far like this stuff or not, or warm to it or find it compelling, if this is true, if Jesus really did rise from the dead, then it would be wise, wouldn't it, to think about how you might get to a place where you accept it, if it's true. Because as I said, if it's true, then it changes everything. And everything we've said so far about our biggest problem and the way to fix it is also true. Something to think about. Now, as I said, you might not be in that category. You might be thinking, actually, I do find this compelling, but I'm just not sure it's true. How can I put my faith, or how can I accept something that happened so long ago? Where's the compelling evidence? Well, we're going to watch a short clip now, and it's a guy called Lee Strobel talking. Lee was, I think he says it in the video, he's the legal editor of the Chicago Tribune, a reporter used to assessing evidence, and he went on his own quest when he himself wasn't a Christian to find out whether the claims of Christianity stacked up or not. And this is what he found.
Well, there are a lot of opinions about God. You look around the world, you see different religions, different beliefs. But to me, it comes down to, where does the evidence point? And if Jesus claimed to be the Son of God and backed it up by returning from the dead, then that's good evidence that he is who he claimed to be, and therefore his words are God's words, and his instructions for us are God's instructions for us, and we can know him personally, experience him on a profoundly deep level, not only in this world, but then ultimately in the world to come. So I look at, did Jesus return from the dead? And I look at the 4 E's as to sort of summarize the evidence. The first E is for execution. Virtually every scholar, believer, non-believer, skeptic, concedes that Jesus was executed in the first century, 30 or 33 AD. You get laughed out of a major academic institution if you claimed otherwise. In fact, the atheist New Testament scholar Gerd Ludemann says Jesus' execution is an indisputable fact. Secondly, you have early accounts that Jesus rose from the dead. So it can't be a legend. It took a long time for legend to develop in the ancient world, at least 2 generations of time, for legend to grow up and wipe out a solid core of historical truth. But in the case of the resurrection of Jesus, we have historical data that goes back to within months of Jesus' life. I mean, that is historical gold. And to me, it rules out the possibility that the resurrection is merely a legend. And third E is for empty. We have an empty tomb. How do we know it was empty? Well, even the enemies of Jesus admitted it was empty. They conceded that when they said, oh, the disciples stole the body. That's just a cover story. They're implicitly admitting the tomb was empty, but they're saying, hey, we got an explanation. The disciples stole the body. Well, frankly, nobody believed that then. Nobody believes it now. Disciples didn't have the motive or the means or the opportunity. But the important thing is they were implicitly admitting that the tomb was empty. The question of history has never been, was the tomb empty? Everybody admitted that. The question was, or how did the tomb get empty? That's really the issue. And you look at the various options and you say the disciples weren't about to steal the body. Why? So they could live lives of deprivation and torture and suffering as a result? I don't think so. The Romans weren't about to steal the body. They wanted Jesus dead. The Jewish leaders weren't about to steal the body. They wanted Jesus to stay dead. I think the best explanation for the empty tomb is that Jesus rose from the dead, especially when we combine it with the fourth word that begins with E, which is the word eyewitnesses. That Jesus appeared alive in a dozen different instances to more than 515 individuals. To skeptics and doubters, as well as to believers, indoors and outdoors, to groups, to individuals. People talked with them, they touched them, they ate with them. I mean, think about that. That's 515 eyewitnesses. I was a legal editor of the Chicago Tribune. One of my jobs was to travel the country and cover major trials. I never saw a trial with 515 eyewitnesses. That's a pretty large amount of persuasive evidence. So I put these 4 E's together: the execution, the early accounts, the empty tomb, the eyewitnesses. To me, that is a powerful case for the truth that Jesus rose from the dead and thus authenticated his claim that he is the Son of God.
Well, I hope you found that helpful. As you can see, what we're talking about here and the way to assess whether or not Christianity is true or not, it's not like a scientific law which we can test and repeat till we know that this is true or not. This is something of history. We have to assess it in the same way of whether or not we believe that Henry VIII had 6 wives or not. We have to look at the evidence and make a call. But this is one of those things, as we said before, if it's true, then it's not a matter of likes or dislikes. It's a matter of fact. It's like gravity. What goes up must come down. And a wise response then is to shape our entire lives around it. And what many people have found is, as they've come to realise that this is true, they've not only found it to be true, but they found it to be beautiful. That there is a God out there who made us. And despite all the offence that we caused him, despite all that enmity that we put between us and him, he has acted in love to send his only Son to sacrifice his life to reconcile us. And so what we'd say, I guess, at the end of the Explore course is that many people present Christianity, any religion, as a leap in the dark. Well, I think what we'd like to say is that, given the evidence, it seems to us like this is a leap into the light. A leap into the light. What Christianity is inviting people to do is put their faith in what Jesus has done on the cross those 2,000 years ago. Put their faith in the fact that he was raised to life, has taken the punishment we deserve, and defeated death, all at the same time. And I think sometimes people wait for faith and look for faith like a feeling. Do you know what? I feel like this is true now. Whereas the Bible presents faith as something much more like an attitude or an action. The same sort of thing as if you go for an operation and the surgeon says to you, will you sign this consent form? And you go, well, based on the evidence I have, based on the fact that you seem trustworthy and you know what you're doing, I will entrust my life to you, and you sign. That's the sort of trust, the sort of commitment that Jesus invites us to make with him. We think it can be summarised in these 2 words: to turn. That's the first word, to turn. Jesus inviting us to say, look, you were running away from me. You wanted nothing to do with me. You wanted to do life your way. Well, Jesus says, look, come back to me. Turn away from that. Turn away from your old attitude and turn to me. Recognise that he is God, that he is King, and we owe him everything. That's the first step, is just to turn, to recognise who Jesus is and his claim on us. The second part is to trust. Turn and trust. That's the 2 steps that Jesus invites us to make. Trust. And we say to Jesus, look, I'm in big trouble. I can't fix this myself, but I trust you. Sometimes the picture is of a helicopter, a rescue helicopter in a storm, where the person's in the water, the waves are crashing over them, there's no way they can do anything to save themselves. The helicopter comes over and the winchman comes down and he says, grab onto me, trust me. That's the invitation that Jesus is asking us, to hold on to him, to trust him with our lives. And unlike any other religion, therefore, Christianity is spelt uniquely. All other religions or philosophies want to talk about this. Do what you do. You must do this. You must do that. You must win a god or a deity's approval if you want to get into his good books. Christianity isn't spelt like that. Christianity is spelt like this. It is all about what has been done for you. It is all about Jesus. It is all about him entering our world. Someone said that Jesus is the only God with scars who would sacrifice himself so that we wouldn't have to do anything. We would just be able to trust what has been done on our behalf. And that's the Christian story. That's the Christian story of where we've come from. God has made us. Where are we going? Well, that's an open question. We're made for eternity, but what will that eternity look like? What's gone wrong with this world? Well, sin, ultimately. Our desire, each of us, our own desire to live life our way. How does it get fixed? Jesus entered the world to fix everything and to promise a new heavens and a new earth where everything that is wrong with this world, all the tears, all the sadness, all the sickness and disease, all of that is done away with. That's the invitation. And what are we here for? What's the purpose? That we might know him, that we might be reconciled to him and live life his way in his world, and know the joy of being part of his family. I hope that's been helpful. Do get in touch if there's any questions you have at the end of all that, and I'd love to engage with you. As I said, at the moment that's restricted, isn't it, to phone calls and emails, but if you would like to get in touch, I'd be more than happy to have a conversation. Thanks ever so much for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you before too long.